Hello, 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 and welcome to this lecture on Emerson. Not that Emerson, Robert Emerson, and um, his his co-authors Rachel Fretz and Linda Shaw in this work that is referenced many times in Among Wolves, Writing Ethnographic Field Notes. Second edition. The first edition, I should mention, is available for free on the internet. So if you haven't bought a copy and are wondering where some of my references are coming from, some of the pages that you're not seeing, apparently the first edition is on the internet. That's okay. Most of this is really unupdated from the first edition. And I really just want to give you an overview of what some of the material is that you'll be able to use for your own purposes when you write your own field notes. So what's the story with writing ethnographic field notes? Why do they have such a central place in this course? Why do they get their own module, for one thing? Aren't they just notes? Aren't they just one way we have of recording things? Well, yes, all of that is true. But what I think it would be fair to say is that within interpretivism, ethnography is sort of in many ways the gold standard method, because it takes into account many of the same considerations that interpretive methodology has in terms of the creation of the reality and the immersion in a context that allows people to interpret for themselves what the meaning of that context is and how routine things work. And field notes and writing field notes in ethnography is the principal way through which information is recorded by the researcher. And it seems self-evident, right? Like it just does. It just seems like, oh, there couldn't be anything simpler than just writing notes. Well, this book really puts the lie to that assumption. This book is so thorough that it just comes from so many really rich anecdotal examples and they wouldn't like that I said anecdotal. But so many rich examples of how these ethnographic practices have been put into effect that it's really very persuasive about the time and the focus and the energy and the forethought that has to go in to even just the act of taking notes in doing research. So it's really the flip side. It's really the answer to the question of what's often referred to as by positivist researchers as methodological rigor. They say that ethnographic or interpretivist work tends to lack methodological rigor, and by that they posit, they infer, they imply that interpretive research broadly and ethnographic research specifically is just journalism. It's just writing down a few choice notes and selectively interpreting things that seem to reinforce existing beliefs. And they say that rigor is lacking because they don't have the painstaking detail that a statistical, empirical observation has. These are empirical observations that are done in ethnographic field notes. And the way that they are constructed is really masterfully recreated by Emerson and his co-authors. And I want to take you through some of the steps in just kind of the broad archetype of what ethnographic field notes look like. So I'm not going to totally take you through all of the outlines. Just in chapter 2 alone, there's 3 different kind of numbered steps of sort of how, 1 through 6 of how to start this particular part of the process of taking ethnographic field notes. And I don't want to take you through that systematically. I just really want to give you this overview. But one of the first things that you should do in taking your in writing down just your initial impressions is your just your sensory impressions of what's happening when you're in the field. And what is the field? The field is whatever context you have chosen to investigate, and you have gotten approval and begun to craft some kind of research design about. It's a context that you feel is important for study of the human condition, broadly speaking. But in the political context, it's some context that you feel is politically significant, whether it's the impact that politics have on a certain group, or it's the kind of pivotal importance that a particular group has on the political process in a particular place, or it's just you want to demonstrate how politics works in any particular context in human society. So you've begun to plant yourself in this context, and you decide, well, I'm going to start to observe things. What are you observing? You, according to the ethnographic experience, and according to Emerson, you take sensory observations, the size of different things, the colors of different things, the noises of different things, the space that you're in recording all of these things, the equipment that you see anywhere performing kind of routine action. And that's the next thing. Beyond just the observations of setting the scene, you also begin to just take notes on things that are that seem routine, that seem ordinary to this particular world. And they give this great example. Emerson and his co-authors give this great example of going to a kind of sort of halfway house for people who had been engaged in sex work, right? And an ordinary conversation that seemed very casual, and with one person who was on the staff of the clinic, and the other that was just sort of a resident, and then going back and immediately calling someone on the phone and saying, look, I think something's up, because we just talked to this person who got a haircut, and a haircut doesn't seem like a big deal, but it was sort of seen as a relapse of some kind. So anyway, so it's a really good example. I urge you to look it up. I really am not able to recreate it as much as it is in Emerson's text. But routine actions, things that are just ordinary conversations, things that are ordinary processes that seem like they could happen for whatever reason, and you just happen to be there that day, and you're just recording what's going on, and your job is not to be there to write a headline. You're not a journalist. You're not someone who is trying to find things that are out of the ordinary. You're not trying to find sensational things. You're not trying to find, something that is going to be scandalous. You're just trying to figure out how things work. You're just there as sort of a novice, because everyone there knows this stuff more than you do, knows your context more than you do. So your job is to be there and take down these routine actions. And another consideration about this is that as you move forward, what you write down is going to change over time. It's gonna be very different at the end from how it is at the beginning. Because things that you had written down at the beginning that seem to take place every day, you might no longer see as significant after a few weeks or a few months. And you might not jot them down again. And you might begin to just sort of almost subconsciously, as you're taking your daily notes and your jottings, you're going to start to prioritize other things in your observations, things that are more out of the ordinary than you thought they were. So, what are jottings? Jottings are just what they sound like. It's where you jot down something. Okay, but let's step back for a minute. This was a key part of what was mentioned in Among Wolves as one of the real contributions of Emerson in this book to just the general field's knowledge about writing field notes and ethnographic field notes. And this idea of jottings is so different than a field note I'm going to almost bracket it and bring it back at the, actually no, I'll talk about it here. So jottings are just one component of this kind of thorough transcription of reality that is through several lenses of the interpretive researcher. That it's worth saying what that process is from start to finish. So you begin with a research design, and you want to study, and it's some kind of interpretive, you want to interpretively study some kind of political context. Okay, and so now you figured out how you're going to get there, and you're going to get money to be there. Grant is what I mean. So you have to sort of sustain your own life while you're being a researcher. You have to transport yourself there. You have to, get yourself situated among the right people where you're going to be able to ask questions, observe things, and, usually most of the time, except Timothy Patriot apparently, make yourself known as a researcher who is going to be basically studying this population where you'll be visiting for some length of time. So once you get there, it sounds very simple. You're just jotting down everything that you can based on what I was just saying. So you're jotting down people's names, but also, and how they interact with each other. But it's not their names specifically that you're after. It's what they're doing and how they're feeling and what they're thinking, why they're doing what they're doing. And that's really one of the key pieces of interpretive research, is that, you understanding what the political or social motivations of people are in terms of what political actions they take. So it's not the objective reality that matters within interpretivist research. It's the reality of the political actors. What they perceive is really the most important thing in figuring out why they take the political actions that they take. So you want to get, in any case, up close and personal with those political actors. And so you do that by, you befriend them, you're very nice, you tell them you're studying this political context, and, so you jot down notes. And you might have something that, here, I'm not endorsing a brand, but I just thought it's kind of funny. Like, I have these little notebooks I like called Fieldnotes, okay, and these Fieldnotes, you could have something like that. You could have, and I think that's one of the more popular things to do among ethnographic researchers, is you could have just a little notebook, and you can write things down. That's historically been the mechanism, but of course it's evolved into what the authors call the evolving symbolism of texting. So they might be able to take down text notes, but I'm not of that ilk. I would never be able to just write down notes on my phone on a text with the same speed, for one thing, as writing down notes just on a piece of paper. Then again, my handwriting's messy, so maybe it would be a good idea to use a phone. So you jot down notes. That's the first draft, really. The second draft is that you then actually sit down with all of your jottings at the end of the day, hopefully at the end of the day, and I'll come back to that. But hopefully at the end of the day, you sit down with all your jottings, and that's when you write your field notes. And your field notes usually are in kind of a 3-column field note that I would refer you back to Patriot Among Wolves to take a look at one form of constructing a field note, because there's actually not a really great diagram in here in Emerson about what a field note looks like. So I'd refer you back to the Patriot for that. But in Emerson, there are a few examples of what to do with field notes. So once you sit down and you write field notes, and usually a field note has 3 columns, and I'm just going to have to describe them because I don't have any room up here. that is not always done this way, but this is what Timothy Patcherot recommends his graduate students do. Okay, so in one column, it's the description. So in one, you write down kind of what you saw happen that day according to your jottings, but also with your memory, what happened that day. The middle column is your reflexivity. And your reflexivity, we've discussed before, is your own kind of self-awareness of your position within the research you're observing and the research context you're observing. And it's kind of what you're thinking and what you're feeling as you're there, and if your mind is elsewhere, or how you reacted to things. It's really very, very much putting the researcher in the middle of that column is kind of symbolic, right? Because you're what's between what happened and the end. The analysis is the middle. It's the researcher themselves and how they're thinking and feeling, and the analysis is the kind of end result. It's the description plus reflexivity equals analysis. It's like a sum. It's like so it's like a little algebra equation. So at the end is analysis. Like this is what I think happened. Based on where I was at the time and where I am now. In my mind and where I was physically during the day, and then put that together with what I saw. I think what the analysis is this is what happened, and so that's your field note. Okay, all of that is so that is your field note for the day. Is going through all of that. So at the end of that, so let me come back to. So I'll come back to that, but that's kind of what a field note looks like. So often, as I said, people will know. People will know, that you are writing things down. And one of the things that you have to avoid writing down is not just your snap judgments or evaluations. You really have to train your mind to only be writing down either observations of external things, in what you're observing and who you're hearing and what you're seeing, smelling, everything else, but also internal things. You can observe, what you're thinking, what your evaluation was, but you can't just say, this person is a jerk. I guess you can, but the idea is not to make that much of a qualitative judgment, in the first jot. You can do that maybe later on in an analysis or maybe in the context, but you really have to just, you have to be objective as much as possible. And then people become used to the field worker's presence. So, even in some jottings and some field notes, there will be scenes recreated that the field worker, the field researcher will write down. That's really well depicted in the Emerson, that some people will make jokes out of it because they know that they're being recorded. It's like they're being watched, and they make a joke out of it, and then the researcher really does write down what they say about the joke. So in order to escape from this kind of awkwardness, some ethnographers like to go retreat to something like a bathroom or an office, in the midst of all of this, the whatever processes they're observing. They like to go to some side room where they can just jot down what they need to so that they don't forget it. And this is better than maybe what are called head notes, and that's pretty self-explanatory. So instead of actually writing things down, you just sort of go for the full-on experience. Some ethnographers prefer that, and they kind of just write down their notes at the end of the day, or after several weeks or months. Not everybody does it exactly this way. It's not a rule. But this is what people tend to do, and this is what Emerson has kind of distilled as this is what most successful ethnography does. But not a rule. Sometimes people go for an entirely different way of doing it. They write down field notes at the end of several months based on their memory, and they just kind of jot everything down, and then they kind of go for a second draft. This seems more systematic. That certainly the researchers in Among Wolves seem to say, the characters anyway, in the Pacharaz seem to say that most ethnographers tend to at least like to write things down at the end of every day that they're doing research. So at the end of some observation day where they're participating in some process and then observing it, whether or not they took down jottings, they're going to go and write at the end of the day in front of their computer probably. But instead of covert jottings in a side room, some people just prefer to just openly take notes. They just openly take notes, and some people like to retreat to a side room. Some people wait till the end of the day. Some people wait for months. But seems to be that you're really making, most of the time, the choice is between taking notes in front of people who are the participants, research participants or informants, or you're doing it in front of them or in some side room where you can come back later and not have to be so overtly awkward. Because there's this imperative to be socially close to people while at the same time being experientially separate. In a way, it's almost like you're being duplicitous, and some people, ethnographers, really struggle with that. They like to, ethnographers almost always feel some sympathy with the people that they're observing, the people they're participating with, and the people that they are kind of immersing themselves in the lives of. And I think that's inevitable. They don't like to think that they're going to be exploiting people. But there is this kind of this terrible history of ethnography, right? Like, this hasn't always had these really noble goals, and even if it has, the kind of means that they've gone to achieve those ends have been fairly imperial and exploitative. And one thing that Emerson's book talks quite a bit about is the history of especially anthropology, where you see ethnographic researchers from the northern hemisphere basically going to poor and underdeveloped countries and observing people as if they're some foreign species. Whereas I think a lot of those researchers would probably say in their defense, well, we really want to study, people in isolation, and no one is isolated, now the same way they were 200 years ago. And we want to see what some of the fundamentals are of human society. But be that as it may, yes, it does seem and can be somewhat exploitative. So these days, there is this kind of tendency to study up, to study sort of upward power dynamics, like how power works in a slaughterhouse, where violence is regimented and segmented, and Wall Street, where it seems to be one of the more powerful sectors of society in many ways is, and sort of how that works, rather than studying some kind of isolated tribe in maybe Africa or Latin America, right, or Southeast Asia. So experientially separate but socially close is very difficult, is easier said than done, but sometimes how you're going to make that dynamic work is how you're going to do your jottings. And then what I want to take you through for a couple minutes is this idea of a close reading and open coding. So this is more in chapter 6. So I have a kind of note here page for me to read you, page 172. So at the bottom of page 172, Emerson and his co-authors say, "We present analytic practices that parallel methods developed by sociologists taking the grounded theory approach to analyzing qualitative data. Grounded theorists give priority to deriving, quote, analytic categories directly from the data, not from preconceived concepts or hypotheses. They maintain that if the researcher minimizes commitment to received and preconceived theory, he is more likely to develop new analytic categories and original theories from his data." That sounds familiar. It should. It's really one of the key distinctions between interpretivism and positivism. So in this case, open coding, the idea of coding and a close reading of field notes is really a key component of ethnography and the way it needs to be carried out. You start with an immersion within the context that you're studying, and you go to an immersion in the field notes. Okay, and within the field notes, you are going to have fresh insights in the field notes, and you're taking, like I said, notes on notes on notes. Your notes are jottings 1, field notes 2, which I've already explained, and then the third thing is coding. So here, coding, C-O-D-I-N-G. And coding is a word that you'll hear often in positivist qualitative research and also in quantitative positivist research because you're taking raw data and you're systematizing it. You are creating categories. And I never meant to give you the impression that in interpretive research there's no systematization. It's just that they allow that to happen. Ethnographers and interpretive researchers allow the systematization to the categories to bubble up from the information that's been collected. So the coding that happens is when you read through your field notes, and again, your field notes are sort of the second draft. You have the jottings first, then you have the field notes, and then you're reading through your field notes and you're taking notes in the margins like it was a book. You're sort of saying, oh, well, this is an instance of, jealousy between patients. I don't know. Or this is a fight that happens between two partisan champions of an issue. The two of them are quarreling, and then you see another, two people from the same political party fighting over some other issue. So you kind of create these categories as you go, as you read through your own notes, rather than creating categories of people or things in order to test a theory that was already there when you went and did the research. So you're not observing people, the difference between positivist, ethnography, positivist field research, and interpretivism and ethnography is that in interpretive ethnography, you are doing this kind of open coding. You're just immersing yourself, taking as many notes as possible. Broken record, I know. But in positivism, when you do that, you're only taking the notes that you need to test the theory that you brought to the research project. You have no theory coming in to the research project if you're an interpretivist or if you're an ethnographer in that tradition. You're just trying to figure out how the routine actions take place and what the motivations are of the people in it. So, yes, you're supposed to have fresh insights as you read through your ethnography. It's like you're immersing yourself a second time. So, page 175. So in quantitative coding, like I said, positivist quantitative coding, like survey research, that kind of thing, the researcher proceeds on page 175 deductively by constructing questionnaires with categories derived from theory. He fits people's responses to the questionnaire into the already established categories in order to determine the frequencies of events within those categories. By contrast, qualitative coding does not start from pre-established or fixed analytic categories, but rather proceeds inductively by creating analytic categories that reflect the significance of events and experiences to those in the setting. I don't know. Who said it better? Me or Emerson? I don't know. We have found the following sorts of questions useful in beginning to examine specific field notes. So after your field notes are written, what kind of questions are you asking? What are people doing? What are they trying to accomplish? How exactly do they do this? What means or strategies do they use? How do members talk about, characterize, and understand what is going on? What assumptions are they making? What do I see going on here? What did I learn from these notes? Why did I include these notes? How is what is going on here similar to or different from other incidents or events recorded elsewhere in the field notes? What is the broader import or significance of this incident or event? What is it a case of? So, and then notes on this page 199. Okay, 179 I think is what I meant to say. So on page 179, they, instead of this whole page of field notes, right? That's like a whole page of field notes. These are the notes in the margin. So without reading the whole thing, taken from a student whose ethnography examined her work as an usher, she talked about customer types, late arrivals, holding out audience members, how there are irate waiters, latecomer claims an exception, manager intervenes, passing the buck between people, calming latecomers, keeping people occupied, distracting them, smiling, minimizing the wait. So ushers in a theater. So that's pretty interesting. So so they didn't they had to go back through their notes, through their field notes, and kind of take those notes in the margin in order to figure out what some of the categories were of the events that were taking place, the routine actions that were taking place. So open coding is a process, and in your assignment you're going to be doing less coding, but more just writing the field note itself, and then seeing, and if you can do some coding, just to kind of see how that might work, that might be valuable. But I'll let Emerson have the last word here. In many instances of poring over field notes, the ethnographer may experience coming up with theory as a process of discovery, but theory only seems to jump out of the data and hit the researcher in the face. This flash of insight occurs only because the researcher's prior analytic commitment built into the notes, the theoretical concerns and commitments she brings to the reading, and the connections she made with other similar events that were observed and written about. Thus, it is more accurate to say that the ethnographer creates rather than discovers theory. She does so not simply in the culminating moment of reading and reflecting on what she has seen and written about previously, but also throughout that prior process of seeing as she writes field notes. It's pretty neat stuff, and it's very thorough. So I hope that you get a chance to immerse yourself in this book rather than just relying on me. Because you're going to need to construct your own field note. And I hope that some of these page numbers will help you, but again, you should go back into Among Wolves when you do that as well. So anyway, but the first thing you'll need to do is literature review, so make sure that you have a proper understanding and gain some knowledge that way. But otherwise, good luck, and let me know if you have any questions or problems.